kind of like where we left off and just figuring out the overall architecture, right? We're using Prefect to basically like hit an external API, or really we're using Prefect to trigger our various Python code in a sequence, right? Where our Python code then hits an external API. We're using that same like adapter pattern, ETL pattern essentially, right? Where we have the separate client. We didn't do a full-on class. We just wrote a function called build client. Uh, and that is where we pass through, remember, like our credentials, our API keys, things like that. And we call this get playlist tracks method, which then basically pulls the raw data, and then we just coerce the data. So we're still following this same, maybe I can make this bigger, this same pattern of, get the raw data, clean it very quickly, load it. You could imagine just getting the raw data and directly loading it here into staging, then coercing it, and then finally loading the data into a database. We said we call this staging, right? What again? Like maybe we can just remember some of the purposes or why we want staging. The idea is a couple things, but it's mainly hold on to original data before we coerce it. All right. And the idea is that while we may not want to work with this data all the time, right? We'd rather work with like some cleaned up data. It's good to have to be able to go back to, just in case there's like more information we may need to extract out of it. Lots of times this could be textual information, right? So maybe that's something that it turns out it could be easier for data scientists to work with data in like CSV formats than working with data like in a database, especially where it's like normalized, things like that. There just might be more information here that we didn't extract out of when we eventually moved it into the database. And reasons why we don't want it in the database are, well, it's lower cost, right? That's one of the main things, to just store this in a CSV file and store it on something called S3, which we'll talk about later. Another reason is it just may be impossible, right, to store like unstructured data in a database, or just like not too feasible. Right, like if it's just purely HTML or something like that, we can just store like one giant text file that doesn't seem like it's really using a database too well. So that's the reason why like it can just be better to store it in S3, store this data where we don't know the value of it, but we still want to hold on to it because eventually we may be able to extract more information out of it. All right, and that's staging. And then ultimately once we store this here, then we can load it into our database. One other reason potentially of using staging is, right, you can like view the data first or make sure it's in the right kind of format. You could maybe run some tests on just the CSV, potentially. I don't know that you need to, but potentially, and then move it into your database. Then from there, like we haven't gotten to this yet, but the next step would be just to, this is a database. Maybe we can build an API that connects to this backend database and serve it. And a reason for that is, right, then same reason, like someone now can just use Python, get back some, or any other language, and get back some JSON data. Maybe our ML models want to read some of this. Maybe our Streamlit dashboard wants to read, data from our API, right? So, we can now build an API on top of this, okay? So this is what we're leading into. Cool. What's next? Okay, we can talk about, like, this may feel early to talk about, like, networking and things like that, but I don't think from experience, it actually probably isn't. It's like 4 months out of the job search, but it can begin to start. So we can talk about like overall goals in networking. We basically say there's two different things you can think of at this stage. One is kind of like warm leads, meaning, and that's probably more later on, where these will be like individuals that maybe have opportunities coming down the down the pike. One thing to point out is like it's actually good if you meet the people before they have an opening, because then it's not as transactional, right? And also when they have an opening, if they're if you're someone who they can think of as like, oh, this is, this person's looking for a position, uh, maybe I wanted to reach out to them, right? Then you can kind of get an inside track on the position, which happens a lot, right? The other thing is to develop a collection of mentors or like helpers, and these are people that provide kind of more informal. Maybe they don't have a position, but also they might be willing to meet with you, once every 6 weeks or talk to you, something like that, right? And they can kind of provide you this kind of like professional perspective you may not get elsewhere. And then two, of course, they might know people that they can introduce you to. A lot of, especially right now, the job market is not so bad. It's better than it was even a few months ago. Certainly better than it was 6 months ago. But still, many of the interviews our students get are through like these soft channels as opposed to applying for LinkedIn, through LinkedIn, things like that, right? And then the other thing is you just learn more, right? Like part of the goal of this is as you start meeting and speaking with more and more engineers, you start sounding like an engineer yourself, right? Like you have like they'll tell you kind of the things that they think through, what it's like to work day to day, maybe some of the books that they read, you can also read. So you basically become a peer, and that really comes across in interviews, when you interview. And it also comes across, the more you do networking. One thing that I found is like just through networking myself, and knowing a lot of like good communities to tap into and individuals in the community, that itself becomes a valuable thing that then, other engineers want to know and want to learn about. So the point is, even if you just know, by networking and meeting some people, getting into some communities, you may be like, well, what do I really have to offer, like an experienced engineer? You can tell them about various like communities that have been really helpful, various books that have been really helpful to you. You'd be surprised, that they really find that types of information valuable. And the other thing is, the stack that we're learning, not everyone knows, like not everyone will be playing around with Prefect and Airflow, which you all will be doing. DBT, you'll be surprised. Like DBT is enormous in certain circles, but you'll still meet people that haven't worked with it and don't really know how to use it. And like just in a week or so, you'll be pretty adept, at it. So yeah, like you may feel like you're still pretty early, but you're conversant, like some technologies, and you'll be surprised. You'll know some material that probably some of the people that you meet won't. So mentors, like how do you do this? Again, kind of what we say is you want to target specific mentors, and these are people that you can ask regularly for advice. Almost feel like a personal board of directors. I had this developing, this company. And these were people I met through networking events. For me, it was other entrepreneurs that were maybe right at the same step I was at or a little bit ahead of it. But it can be something similar for you guys. Like it can be, people even just like a year of experience or 6 months ahead of experience is fine. And great things to just talk about is, okay, like what do you recommend in terms of breaking into a position? I just would like to learn about your career journey. People love to talk about themselves, but actually those stories are also very beneficial for you, right? About how they broke into a new career. And then what technologies would you use? We have questions written down that you can ask, but a lot of it's things like that, right? But probably more than just the questions is if you approach it from a place of genuine curiosity, that's really how you make a connection, right? You don't want it to feel transactional, but actually feel like, you all share interests typically, right? You share probably a similar kind of journey. So it shouldn't be that hard. Not with every person, but 1 out of 3 or so, if you're meeting the right people, you might feel a genuine connection. And then, one piece of advice, if like the conversation goes well and it seems like helpful, you just say, hey, I really got a lot out of this. Do you mind if I schedule something for, like make this a quarterly meeting, or I schedule something for like a couple months from now? And at the end of the phone call, I'll put something in the calendar right there, and invite them. And then same thing, like before the conversation comes up, it's good just to message them again, and just say like, hey, just want to make sure we're still on or something like that. Looking forward to it. If they can't do it, then they'll maybe half the time they'll say, hey, I can't do it this time, but then they'll reschedule. And that's the same thing. Like we'll send out various Slack channels that can hook you up with like coffee dates, over Zoom, with people. And if you just wait for like the Slack channel like to connect you and you don't make any effort, then people will no show you all the time. But you want to just like message them beforehand and ask, and then they'll tell you if they can, and you won't waste your time. Or about half the time they'll say, hey, yeah, definitely, I'm down, I want to meet. And then like helpers, right? These are people who you go to for specific advice. One thing to point out with both of these things is that, if you remember a little while ago, we talked about like finding your niche, right? Or like your particular interest. This stuff is probably like developing a strong connection is easier if you have, you're more certain about that. Why is that? You'll know more about that narrow field. And when you meet someone else who's in that narrow field, they'll really value that exchange of information. Like for me, I know a lot about like the boot camp space. When I meet other people like that write about it, or work in it, or have worked in it closely, anything about or data engineering as well, right? Like they're happy to talk to me, even if it helped me lots of times, just because I have something to offer them too, right? I have like this very niche knowledge. So it's not, I don't necessarily have like super broad knowledge, but this niche knowledge can really help others that share that. So it's the same thing for you, if you're able to go narrow, and then actually like genuinely just read books on it, or read articles, or, get into those communities, that's really helpful. The other reason why it's helpful is, like I said, these, in terms of having people that will think of you when a job opens up. If it's just like, well, I'm really interested in data engineering, that's easy to find. Like that's very easy to find someone who's looking for interest in data engineering. But if it's something more specific than that, then right, it's like, oh right, I remember I wanted someone that's interested in a data engineer who's really interested in like customer analytics and applying that to X, Y, and Z, to the fintech space. Right, like that, and now I have a position for this, or I heard of a position like this. It's much easier to stick in someone's brain, or to like for them to remember you, if the more specific it is. Okay, so who can you like reach out to? A lot of you currently have jobs, which is great, because it means that one, you can reach out to former bosses. You all have internships, things like that. Close connections, I found, have been very helpful, and they might feel like the reason why I bring this up is they're easy to kind of overlook, but like it could be the case that a close family member of yours works for like a Fortune 500 or Fortune whatever, some sort of larger company, or even if it's a smaller company, or they work in like as an engineer, and they can help that you. What the benefit of very close connections is, they're often willing to use their own network to help you out, right? Going a little bit broader, obviously like bosses or other mentors from other fields, you can look through like their LinkedIn, or see where they're involved, and ask them for introductions to people. Other things that's useful if you're currently working is go on your like company's network with other people in your company. Meaning, like, maybe you're not a data engineer, but talk to people that are data engineers and say, hey, I'm taking this course, I'm really interested in this. Do you have like 30 minutes just to talk? I'm about to start an internship, would love to get some advice as to things that have been really helpful for you, right? So you can just like kind of ask for advice. And it may, it's a lot easier to do that if you kind of have some sort of relationship already, even if it's just kind of through being part of the same community. Other things that are useful are your alumni network, where you graduated from. When I graduated from law school, I didn't want to be a lawyer, so I went on my alumni network and emailed, I don't know, 10 people, and four of them got back to me. And what was nice is that they weren't people 2 years older than me, but people like 10, 20 years older than me, and they could really give me some valuable advice. And the other thing is, even though those individuals didn't actually give me weren't like, hey, you can, here's an didn't lead to an interview or anything like that. People were impressed that I did that work beforehand. When I went on interviews, because I met CEOs who were like, oh, you skipped the whole business school stage because you called someone and they told you didn't have to do that. Like, you could just go through this other path. I wish I did something like that. They themselves were impressed with just that approach. So you learn a lot through this. Other things is just you'll find we can give you Slack communities, things like that. We have different kind of ways to reach out. Other things that I remember that I really recommend, and things that I have done personally, is literally go through every one of my LinkedIn connections. Just scan through them. More 3/4 of them are probably very irrelevant to to what you're looking for. But you'll find some that are, and if it's even just 10 is plenty of people to reach out to, and then maybe 4 of them will get back to you and have conversations with you, right? So I would start there. Start with kind of relationships that you already have, and then from there, obviously, we'll have other ways of building out more connections. But you'll get them naturally through your through the internship. But it's good to start now, and don't just lean on that. Here there's a lot of other sources where you can do that. And the other thing is, it takes a little while to build this kind of network and to tell people that you're looking for a transition and to get this advice and all that stuff, right? And to build a relationship with people in the field. So it's good to start doing that now. And also, there's a reason why I'm saying this before the internships, because things will get more busy for you in a month or so, right? So now's a good time for this. Other things. So we talk about tapping into an existing network, crafting an elevator pitch. So I think that I've mainly talked about this already. So here we just have some some people again to talk to. The other thing you can do is just talk to people. Some people have had success just literally reaching out to people that they're genuinely interested in on LinkedIn. I have a lot of success reaching out to people on Slack. That you'll see the intros. I can give you an example of this. In 1 second. So in the health, there's a Slack community called, for instance, right, the health tech nerds. And what I'll do is I'll just look at the intros, and if I see some stuff here where I share an interest, it looks like even if I share a location, I'll reach out to them. I was in Indiana, right, a couple weeks ago. I saw someone post that they're in Indiana. I'm like, that's not super often that you meet a tech person around there. So that led to a conversation and, led to a student internship from there, a pretty good paid position. So you'd be surprised, just having that these conversations can really kind of lead to, good opportunities. All right. So, in a lot of these people, they're posting here. That's something just to notice, is that these people are posting on the channel and putting themselves out there because they want to network, right? Because even they might have a job, but also, and be a data engineer or have the job that you want, but they might be looking for something else. So they're happy, again, to talk to you. And then again, same thing, we'll share with you different networking communities. So just your knowledge about that, just the fact that you can kind of share some of that information with them, can be really helpful. All right. Um, Other things. Okay. Here's kind of like, this is especially true on the interview, but you know, a couple things just to point out is that when you're, they'll ask to know about you. You'll probably introduce yourself. When you write, say you like Slack somebody or you message somebody on LinkedIn or alumni network. A couple things you want to do. One is you want to talk about how your interests align with theirs, right? Like I met some people in like climate tech that had an international development focus, and I, like kind of got into education because through international development and things like that. So I just said, I'm like, hey, it may not seem like it, but we actually share like some similar interests. I'm really interested in international development, but like this type of thing. We got a conversation through that. And then the other thing to point out is that when people ask you like, tell me about yourself, especially in uh, especially in an interview, they're not asking you to tell them your resume. They already have your resume, right? Instead, what you want to talk about is more why answers, like why you got into something, why you took the path you did. That's much more compelling than what you did, all right? So for me, it would be, why I got into education, right? Or why I got into engineering. And if you're not quite sure about that stuff, take some time to reflect and think about it. But this is probably the biggest piece of coaching I've had to give people. And it's also paid off a lot. Because again, people are really looking for your passion, especially when when you're switching careers. So, that's what I recommend doing, is getting that stuff down. We have a couple of links here. I really like this guy. He used to like run career services for Duke's Business School, and he gives some really good advice. And basically, like, it's a lot about that. Like, the tell me about yourself is kind of, it's not like I'm interested in baseball or